They said the sound of cicadas in the Georgia heat could make a person lose their mind. Maybe that's why no one remembers what happened in the summer of 1871. Or maybe, they remember too well. If you stand on the edge of the Oconee River, just outside of Clark County, there's a house that isn't there anymore. You won't see it, but the ground still remembers its shape, the way the porch sagged on the left, the way the windows faced the sun like eyes that never closed. The locals used to call it the Walker Place. And for almost a century, people swore the earth itself was sick where it once stood. But before it was cursed, it was a family home. Elias Walker, a war veteran of no great distinction, returned from the fields of Tennessee in 1865 with a limp and a silence that could fill a room. His wife, Mary, had kept the house alive in his absence, along with their 2 children, Thomas and Clara. Thomas was 12 when his father came back. Clara was 8. And what grew in that house after the war wasn't peace, it was something much darker, something that hid behind the language of duty and family. The Walkers were poor, like most after the Confederacy fell. Land was worthless, neighbors gone, and the law barely meant anything. Elias drank from sunrise to dusk. And when he didn't, he prayed. His prayers were long, trembling things, words meant more for punishment than salvation. He believed the war had ended because God turned his face away from the South, from his people, from him. It was Thomas who bore the weight of that belief. At 16, he worked the plow alone, his hands cracked and bleeding, his eyes dull like a man twice his age. Clara tended to her mother, who had grown pale and frail, her voice fading into whispers that never left her room. The siblings learned early to speak softly, to move quietly, to hide their smiles. Because in the Walker house, joy was treated like sin. But secrets grow where silence reigns. No one in Clark County remembered seeing the Walkers much by 1870. They stopped attending church. The local postmaster said the family's letters came unopened, yellowing in the drawer behind his desk. The mail for Elias was mostly debts, notices, and once, a letter from his brother in Savannah, offering to take the children. It was never answered. That summer, Clara turned 17. The neighbors who passed by said they sometimes heard her singing at dusk, out near the fields. Old hymns, mostly, but slower, sadder, like she was trying to remember how hope used to sound. One night, a woman from a nearby farm swore she saw 2 figures walking by lantern light across the property, one taller, one smaller, hand in hand. She told her husband the next morning that something about it didn't feel right. By autumn, Mary Walker was dead. The obituary in the Athens Banner called it a sudden fever. But anyone who's read the old county register knows there were no outbreaks that year. The doctor who signed the paper, a man named Dr. Abel Farnsworth, wrote a single line in his private notes, one that would never appear in public record: suspicious discoloration at the neck. No clear cause. Elias buried her under the willow tree and marked the grave with no name, only a cross of 2 nailed boards. And after that, he hardly spoke at all. Clara stopped singing. Thomas began drinking. Neighbors whispered that the Walkers had gone mad with sorrow. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was quieter. The truth lived behind closed doors, where grief and guilt share the same bed. In March of 1871, Clara disappeared for 3 days. When she came back, her dress was torn, her eyes hollow, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold a cup. The story she gave her father was that she had gone to stay with a friend, but Elias, perhaps too lost in his own ruin, didn't ask which friend. Thomas said nothing. 9 months later, a midwife named Judith Hall was called to the Walker home. She would later testify, though no one would believe her, that Clara screamed a name during childbirth that wasn't her father's, wasn't God's, wasn't any name the midwife recognized. She said the child was born with a mark on his shoulder that looked almost like a handprint, as if someone had tried to pull him back before he crossed into this world. They named the boy Isaiah. Thomas built him a crib out of pine wood. He carved it himself, with the same knife he used to mend the plow handles. He never said a word about where he got the wood. But one night, after too much whiskey, he told a neighbor that the tree bled when he cut it. The man laughed, thinking it was a drunk's talk. But Thomas didn't laugh with him. By the next year, Elias Walker was dead. His body was found in the river, his pockets full of stones. The county coroner called it suicide. Others called it justice. No one attended his burial except Thomas, Clara, and the child. After that, the Walker name disappeared from the records. The house burned to the ground sometime before 1875, whether by accident or design, no one could say. But what the fire didn't take, the whispers did. For decades, no one spoke of what had happened there. Until, in 1929, a surveyor clearing land for a new cotton route unearthed a small box buried deep beneath what used to be the Walker property. Inside was a single piece of parchment, damp and half-rotted, bearing a line written in a woman's hand. "He carries both our sin and our blood." And beneath it, the initials, C.W. No historian has ever verified its authenticity. But locals will tell you it's real. Because some nights, when the air hangs thick and still over the Oconee, they say you can hear a woman's voice carried through the fields, humming an old hymn, the kind meant to keep children from crying. And just beneath it, if you listen close enough, the echo of a man's voice, singing the same song. But the words don't match. Because neither of them ever learned how to forgive, time has a way of sanding down the edges of truth until all that's left is a shape we can bear to look at. But if you dig deep enough, you'll find that the Walker story never really disappeared. It just changed its name, like sin wearing a new face. The official records after 1875 make no mention of Clara or Thomas Walker. Yet, in the 1880 census for Greene County, just 70 miles away, Clara White appears, 26 years old, widowed, with a child listed only as Isaac, age 8. The handwriting is faint, almost hesitant, as though whoever filled the page was uncertain about what to call him. Isaac. Isaiah. Same boy. Different name. People who've studied that census entry say Clara had no husband listed, no property, no trade. Just a small cabin on the edge of a tobacco field owned by a man named Whitmore, a former overseer who'd made his living leasing the broken to the desperate. Clara's name appears again in the county tax ledgers for 2 years, and then, nothing. No death certificate, no grave, not even a rumor. But the boy keeps showing up. In 1893, an I. White was convicted of assaulting a farmhand in Hancock County. The court transcript is only a page long, but the testimony says the attacker spoke with no emotion, like he was remembering a dream. The victim survived. Isaac was fined, not imprisoned, because the judge, perhaps out of pity or fear, wrote that the young man was feeble-minded and not right in his head. After that, he disappears again. Somewhere in the gray folds of Georgia history, people like him, the unwanted, the unrecorded, are swallowed whole. But every so often, something surfaces. A property deed, a birth record, a single word scrawled in the margin of an old journal. And when you piece those together, a pattern emerges. It said that when Clara lived in Greene County, she wouldn't let anyone near the boy. She kept him indoors, even during the long summers when the walls boiled with heat. The neighbors said the child didn't cry, didn't play, didn't speak. They said his eyes were too knowing for a little one. One woman swore she heard him talking to someone at night, soft words, like a lullaby sung backward. That woman left Georgia before winter came. Years later, when new settlers cleared the old Whitmore property, they found strange marks etched into the underside of the cabin floorboards. Circles and lines, cut deep into the wood, like someone was trying to bind something down there. The planks were burned at the edges, as though from candle flame. And beneath the boards, they found a rusted chain. No one ever claimed it. If you ask the oldest families in Greene County, they'll tell you that was the year the dogs started howling at nothing. That was the year livestock were found dead in the morning, eyes open, untouched by teeth or blade. That was the year people started saying the ground there didn't take seed anymore. But you won't find any of that in the archives. Those stories live in kitchens, in front porches, in voices that lower to whispers when the night gets too still. And the most chilling part? In 1901, a traveling preacher, Reverend James Calloway, wrote in his journal about visiting a widow and her cursed child in the Greene County woods. His entry was short, but one sentence stands out, burned into the paper by the weight of his handwriting. The boy knew my sins before I spoke them. He never wrote of them again. 2 years later, Calloway's church burned down during Sunday service. No cause ever found. Every name on that congregation list is gone from the census after 1903. It's as though the fire didn't just take the building, it erased the people, too. And yet, somehow, the name White appears again in 1919. Not in Georgia this time, but in Alabama. A drifter, arrested for vagrancy. Dark hair, light eyes, described as silent, almost childlike. Age uncertain. He told the sheriff his name was Isaiah. He said he came from the Red Land, where the river hums at night. The sheriff thought he was touched in the head, maybe shell-shocked from the Great War, and let him go. A week later, a farmhouse burned down 15 miles from the jail. A woman and her 2 daughters died inside. Witnesses said they saw a man standing at the edge of the field, watching the flames. When they called out to him, he didn't run. He just smiled and walked into the smoke. No body was ever found. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you bury the past, or let it burn? Because that's the question history never answers. The descendants of the Walker family, if any survived, never spoke of where they came from. By the 1930s, the story had dissolved into a handful of local ghost tales, a woman who sang in the cornfields, a boy who grew into a man but never aged, a name whispered in the dark when children wouldn't sleep. But in 1956, a historian from the University of Georgia named Dr. Emmett Langston began collecting oral histories from rural counties. In one recording, his notes describe an elderly woman who called herself Miss Thelma. She claimed her grandmother once worked for a pale woman named Clara who lived like she was waiting for someone. When Langston asked her what she meant, the old woman replied. She said her brother would come back when the river turned red again. Langston's team dismissed it as folklore, another southern haunting born from grief and rumor. But what he didn't publish in his report was what happened after that interview. 3 nights later, Langston's home caught fire. The blaze consumed everything, his notes, his recordings, even the reel-to-reel tape labeled Walker. The official report said it started from a faulty oil lamp. But the surviving neighbors said otherwise. They said they saw something in the smoke, the outline of 2 figures standing side by side. One tall. One small. The flames reflected in their eyes like mirrors. And that's where the trail ends, at least on paper. The government records, the university archives, the county ledgers, all stop at the same point. It's as if someone, somewhere, decided the Walker line had been told enough. But every so often, someone new goes looking. A writer. A historian. A stranger who finds an old letter in an attic and starts asking questions. And sometimes, if they dig too deep, the same pattern repeats. First, they start dreaming of rivers. Then, of music they've never heard before. And then, of a woman in white, standing just beyond the edge of the light. That it's easy to think of these stories as ghosts, as if naming them that way makes them safe, shadows of another century that can't touch us now. But history doesn't stay buried. It waits. And sometimes, it waits inside us. In 1984, a construction crew clearing land near the Oconee uncovered what they first thought was an old cistern, a stone pit, sealed with iron. But when they broke it open, what they found inside didn't belong to water. The reports were quiet, classified as unverified human remains, early Reconstruction period. No one paid much attention. Georgia soil is full of bones. But one of the workers, a man named Richard Sloan, took a photograph before the site was covered again. It showed something that shouldn't have been there, the faint carving of two initials in the stone rim. T.W. Thomas Walker. The photo was never published. The man who took it was found 6 weeks later, drowned in his bathtub. No sign of struggle. The sheriff ruled it accidental. And the pit was filled, paved over, and forgotten. But that photograph still exists, not in museums or archives, but in private hands. Passed from one collector to another, its corners frayed, the image fading like the last breath of something that once knew your name. And anyone who's seen it says the same thing, that when you stare too long at the shadows in the frame, it feels like someone is standing just behind you. By now, the Walkers are less of a family and more of a wound. Their story isn't one of love or sin or punishment, it's about inheritance. The kind that doesn't show up in wills or deeds. The kind written into blood. Genetic researchers in the early 2000s ran a small study in Clark and Greene counties, tracing recessive disorders that seemed to cluster in rural lineages. One sample, logged as Subject 34B, showed anomalies that matched no known pattern. When the participant was asked about his ancestry, he said something strange. He said, "My people came from the river. But we never cross it." No one followed up. And maybe that's for the best. Because what if the Walkers never died out? What if the same current that carried Elias's body down the Oconee still moves through veins today, diluted, forgotten, but alive? What if someone, right now, carries that secret inside them, never knowing the name it once had? There's an unmarked graveyard just south of where the Walker house once stood, choked by vines and pine roots. The stones are blank, faceless, some no larger than your hand. Local hunters say they've seen candles there, late at night, too steady to be wind, too distant to be headlights. And sometimes, they hear a baby crying. But there are no babies buried there. In 2017, a filmmaker named Andrew Pike tried to shoot a documentary about that land. His footage was never released. The production note said he recorded something in the field, something his camera picked up but his eyes couldn't see. He wrote that it moved like a reflection on water, but there was no water there. A month later, Pike quit the project. He sold his cameras, moved out of state, and never spoke publicly again. The remaining footage was lost when his storage unit in Atlanta was broken into. The only thing recovered was the soundtrack, 26 minutes of static, with a faint hum underneath. Some say if you slow it down, you can hear a voice. A woman's voice. Singing. The same hymn that was heard in the fields over 100 years ago. Most dismiss it as superstition, folklore, Southern Gothic nonsense. But if you strip away the fear, what's left is something worse, truth. Truth that a war broke a man. That his silence became violence. That a family's shame became a cycle. And that somewhere, a daughter bore a child not out of love, but out of what happens when love dies and control takes its place. History doesn't need ghosts. We make enough of our own. Still, there's something about the Walker story that refuses to die. Perhaps because it speaks to something deeper, the rot that hides inside respectability, the madness that grows in the shadow of faith, the kind of inheritance that doesn't fade with time. In 2021, a storm tore through Clark County and exposed part of an old foundation near the riverbank. Archaeologists were called in. Beneath the mud, they found remnants of charred wood and iron nails twisted by heat. Tests dated the remains to between 1870 and 1875, the exact years the Walker home was said to burn. And beneath that ash, buried almost deliberately, they found a fragment of porcelain, a child's toy, half a face, one blue-painted eye. The official report listed it as domestic debris. Unofficially, the lead archaeologist quit the project the next day. If you ever drive down Route 15 on a foggy morning, you might pass the place without realizing it. It's just a stretch of field now, quiet, unremarkable. But if you stop and roll down your window, you'll notice the air feels heavier there, like the ground is holding its breath. The cicadas go silent. The trees lean away from the wind. And if you listen long enough, beneath the hum of the river, you might hear it, the sound of two voices, a man's and a woman's, weaving through the heat. Not arguing. Not crying. Just, remembering. Because some stories don't end when the people do. Some stories keep watching us, waiting to be told again. And when you finally walk away from that place, if you find yourself looking over your shoulder for no reason at all, don't worry. That's just history making sure you remember what you heard. After all, the past never sleeps. It just changes its name.